Yo guys, today there was an Overwatch 2 dev Q&A session on Reddit, and they gave a lot of insightful information about the balance and design philosophies for Overwatch 2. I'm a top 100 player who's been playing the game since the very beginning, so I'm going to use this knowledge to tell you guys what this means for us and what it means for us going forward in regards to balance decisions and the new characters that we're going to get. So this first question here talks about pain points and then talks about the overcomplexity of newer characters that have been added to Overwatch. So for those of you who don't really know what a pain point is, it's essentially just a situation in which something happens to you and it doesn't feel good, right? Okay, I get it, yes, dying, losing, they don't really feel good in the game, but the pain points we're talking about in particular are ones that can be removed easily without changing those things, like cloud control and then one-shots, right? But another one was mentioned in this that is the fundamental cause of both too much crowd control and too many one-shots, and that is complexity. Specifically complexity of characters being unkillable, essentially. To not ramble onto this for too long, when you have characters in the game that basically just have buttons that they can press to stop themselves from dying really easily, like Baptiste's regenerative burst or his lamp, or Kiriko's Suzu and her ability to just fly away, that in addition to having insane healing numbers, makes it so you have to rely on crowd control and one-shots to be able to kill things. If you look at Overwatch when it first released, there was very limited abilities like this, and then there was also very limited healing numbers. So if you were playing against a tank, you as a soldier could run off onto the edge and just poke them down from range. And if they got knocked low HP, there was a limited chance they were going to be healed up, because the two highest healing characters you had in the game were Mercy and Lucio. And Mercy healed less than she does now. So you really didn't have the ability to just keep them up. You didn't have a Baptiste chunking healing into them. You didn't have a Suzu putting your lamp onto the Winston to stop them from dying or whatever. There was not as much as you could do. So you were a lot more dependent on consistent overtime damage and consistent positioning better and taking advantages and securing resources from enemies a lot better. But the game is no longer like that, so you have to rely on what lets you simply get the kills, which is one-shots and crowd control abilities. Playing against something like a Baptiste, his lamp can be very oppressive. He tosses it behind a corner, you can't kill the target, right? But if you play Widowmaker or Hanzo and you just shoot him in the head, he can't really use his abilities anymore once he's dead. Same thing works for healing. It doesn't matter how high the healing is if they just get bursted down. So you use your one-shots or your stuns, you sleep somebody, you walk on top of them, everyone piles up on them, blows them up, right? That is how Overwatch is played now. Whereas before, it would have been viable in the original version of Overwatch, but not as viable because you could get a lot of damage. You could get a lot of value from just pumping in damage primarily into them. Like I said, Soldier 76 flanks, pumps damage into the Winston. The enemy team is not going to be able to heal that up during the fight, and so you've now exerted a huge amount of pressure onto the enemy, and you're able to surround them, whittle them down over time, and get a lot of value. So going on to how the developer answers this, he basically says that they are looking at some hero design philosophies to see if Overwatch 1 philosophies match into Overwatch 2 philosophies, but they do say that counterplay is very key to their development strategy. Now, they say that, but then they also keep putting out these characters that don't really have any sort of core counterplay. For example, Kiriko, what are you really supposed to do against her? There's no character you pick to just go hunt her down, right? There's nothing you can do that just plays well against her, more so than just a character that can, again, one-shot her, right? But even that's not like a hard counter. Take a look at something like Sojourn. Again, what do? You just click on her head better. Doesn't matter if you dive her, she can just slide away. She doesn't really do badly into you running into her face because, again, she can just run away, right? You have to just out-snipe her. Again, back to the one-shots. Now, things get a little bit weird here when the developer says that they think there's a lot of positive feedback surrounding the complexity in hero kits and that that's something that they could continue down, right? Them saying that it would be easy to do that as if it's just like the dominant strategy, right? And instead they say that they want to create more variety and have characters that have some complexity and some that don't have complexity. And that sounds great, right? It sounds like the whole Overwatch motto of wanting everyone to be able to be involved, having all this stuff, whatever, garbage, right? But the problem with this is when you put characters that have high complexity into the same sphere, the same gaming sphere as a character that doesn't have complexity, you just don't play the characters that don't have as much complexity. They just don't match up. They don't have the general value. And then, like I said, since this complexity is either having insane sustain or the ability to insane sustain your teammates, or the ability to just click on something's head and kill it with a one-shot capability like Sojourn and not be punished during that, there's no reason to play the non-complex characters. So whether we can actually trust them or not to go on this variety of having some complex, some non-complex, doesn't really matter because the characters that are complex will always be better. Hence why the ones that aren't complex aren't really in the meta. Moving on to the next question here, we're going to continue to see more evidence of the developers not understanding that this over-sustain / over-complexity issue is a huge pain point. So the person who asked this question basically said that there's certain characters that people like having as meta a lot more, like Reinhardt, Winston, Tracer, Lucio, and Ana. And then there's characters that people don't like having meta, like Roadhog, Doomfist, and Moira. And then ask, do you balance towards the characters that people like being meta and balance against the characters that people don't like having meta? The developer basically says that they don't do that, which to be honest kind of seems silly, because if most people like characters, then you should probably balance those ones to be a little bit better, but whatever, right? The issue with this though is that the developer says that the reason the characters that are popular are played is because they were around at the beginning of the game. Now, you can literally see that's wrong with just what they've said. So yes, if you look at Reinhardt, Winston, Tracer, and Lucio, yeah, they were all there at the beginning of the game. But so was Roadhog. And so was a lot of these other characters that people don't like playing against, right? You have characters like Widowmaker, Hanzo, Hog, that are all beginning of the game characters that people hate having as meta. And then characters that were reworked of old Doomfist, old Orisa, old Bastion, old Mei that people absolutely hated having meta. Now, the reworks also, people don't really like being meta because they're still painful to play against, right? But that's the issue, is that they're not based on how old they are in the game, but how painful they are to play against. So if you look at Reinhardt, Winston, Tracer, and Lucio, they're not really painful to play against because they play on these small advantages that I've talked about earlier, where you play in better positioning, right? So for example, you know, like something like a positioning will give you a lot better advantage, or hitting your shots better, or whatever it may be. If you compare something like a Reinhardt versus Reinhardt matchup, if the one Reinhardt positions better than the other one and ends up taking less damage because of that, the way Overwatch 1 was originally, his team would have a large advantage just because of the fact that now he has more resources to push with. It's not like that in the game right now. Now you'd have two Orisas playing against each other and they're both just popping their "oh, I don't die" button. And it's whoever just stuns someone better or just cycles their "I don't die" buttons better or whatever, right? It's just not the same level of simple like min-maxing fun value, right? It's press button to win, or I don't press button to win yet, versus playing very carefully on when to push, when to pull back, where to position, aiming your shots, like getting the absolute max value out of your cooldowns and things like that, right? And so compare that to the characters that I mentioned that aren't fun to play against, like the Widowmaker, Hog, Hanzo, where you just get one shot and you're dead. You know, you get hooked from Mars and pulled in, and then you get a giant arrow going around multiple corners to kill you or whatever, and there's just like limited counterplay, or you're just being so oppressed playing against them is not fun. Like that's the difference of playing against those versus, like I said, the Winston, Reinhardt, Soldier kind of characters. It has nothing to do with how long they've been in the game. Now, there is a little bit of an outlier of Moira. Moira isn't painful to play against, but she's really more painful to play with unless you have a full team built around her. Because if you're playing like a Moira into an Ana and you get antied as a tank, well then you just die. And your Moira just sits there and tries to pee on you, but it doesn't do anything, right? So it's just not fun. And that's part of the issue with Moira. I personally really do like Moira metas when it's Moira v Moira because it doesn't have this disadvantage, but that's beside the fact. So then the dev mentions a fun little exercise we could do to imagine what it would be like if launch characters were announced as new characters nowadays, and to see what the community reception would be to them. And I wish the dev would do that because it reveals a lot about the character design issues. And the thing is that I have done this, so I know that there's two fundamental issues with this. The first one is people just look at them and go, oh, the character's too simple, it's just getting out-kitted by these other characters. And then the other thing they do is not ever release it in that state, because they would never release a simple character, and they don't. They always overkit them. The first issue, like I said, people would look at it and go, oh, why should I try out this new Winston character when I have a character that has the same sort of dive potential but just slams people and then they fly up in the air? You know, you get a lot more free value out of Wrecking Ball than you do Winston. And there's gonna be a lot fewer people trying to pursue and learn that character and enjoy it as this brand new thing, right? This brand new, cheap, easy value, I go back and play Overwatch and have a fun time playing the new character sort of thing, right? People just wouldn't do that as much, so it wouldn't be received very well. And then, like I said, if Winston was released today, he definitely would have a new ability, something. Whether it be a more consistent primary fire damage at range, so like basically his regular damage, but he can just beam at range also. Maybe something like a little primal slap he has on a cooldown to just knock enemies away from him, a stun on his jump, something. Definitely would not be this simple. Like if you compare something like Sigma being a more complex character, if Sigma had been released at launch, he wouldn't have had his grasp ability. And he would have been a lot more balanced. And they could have made him stronger in some other areas, and he wouldn't have had this, like I say, press this button to not die ability, and he would have been able to play more in these smaller resource advantages, right? But it's a little bit annoying to have them say this and have me go, yes, I've done this. Please do it yourself. Please see the flaw. This character would not work nowadays because you were just giving everyone this like It's like they're giving everyone a cupcake and it just has so much sugar in it that they just eat it and yeah, it tastes amazing, right? Versus a character like Winston that's a lot more refined of a taste, right? And it doesn't make you feel sick after you eat it, or someone throws it at you. I don't know where this example is going, but yeah. Now, having demonstrated that they don't fundamentally understand this pain point of too much sustain causing all these other issues and just this over complexity being a huge issue for the game, the devs decide to then show another problem and show potentially why this original issue of complexity isn't ever being solved. And that is because of an excessive focus on stats. Now, at the bottom of the question, they do say that their primary goal with hero balance is to try and get every hero to be viable at the very top of the ladder in Masters to top 500 general range. Now, that's a generally good goal in a balanced game, but the problem with this is that Overwatch 1 isn't a balanced game, and 2, they're not doing it for the right reasons. They are doing it specifically to try and make the characters be within a range of statistical viability, since it's a measurable goal, which means they're referring to data. Which, if we're trying to put this in general terms, they're basically saying, hey, we don't actually know the fundamental flaws with our game. We don't actually fundamentally know how to fix our game. So we're just going to make numbers make sense and pretend that works, right? Which, as I've talked about plenty of times before on this channel, making data balanced doesn't make fun. You have to fundamentally balance the game first. You have to understand how all the characters interact with each other, how playstyles interact with each other. You have to understand how characters can be designed in a way where they're way too strong, where they disparately affect lower ranks like Reaper, or are way more impactful at high ranks like Widowmaker. And then you have to understand all this sort of stuff, all this complex stuff, get it to work together, which they have failed to do in Overwatch, and was only close to being done at the very, very beginning of Overwatch, like 2016-ish, late 2016, 2017. And then you can balance by the number. Because at that point, when the fundamentals are there, once the foundation of your house has been set, then you can then go, oh, okay, in this balanced game, we have Soldier 76 dealing about 10% more damage. His win rate is about 5% higher than he should be. His win rate against, like, not playing against other Soldier 76s is about 5% higher than it should be. So we'll lower his damage a little bit, right? You can do that later on, but in the current state, you can't. And yet they're using it as a crutch. Because if they get the numbers fixed and the numbers are balanced, well then, you know, they have the data, right? They should know. That's their thought process. And they're looking at other people who complain about these things, like me, and say, oh, well, you just don't have the data, right? Well, no, they don't know how the game actually fundamentally works, because they have not ever spent the time to grind and play the game at a very high level for years that they need. So to add some more evidence of this using data as a crutch and not understanding the game fundamentally, we have our next question. So the question asker says, how are you feeling about snipers at the moment? Sometimes it just feels oppressive playing against a good Widow, and that with one tank it's not as simple as getting your Diva or Winston to dive onto them. Are players effectively able to counter snipers without simply having a better sniper now in 5v5? Well, I'll answer you, no. It basically 99% of the time comes down to who clicks on the other person's head better. Maybe not 99%, but it's very drastically biased towards that. However, the Blizzard developer here, who is the lead balance designer, by the way, says, very first off, I was looking at Widowmaker's stats just last week. I don't care about stats. I don't care what stats you're going to tell me. No matter what stats they throw at me, it does not change fundamentals about Widowmaker's core design. And so he says that mainly for map balance discussions, they had 4 to 5 maps where Widowmaker was very effective, 4 to 5 maps where she was quite bad or rarely picked, and the rest were playable, right? So really translating this, there's 4 to 5 maps where Widowmaker takes 9 other people's lives hostage for the remainder of the game. 4 to 5 maps where if she's playing on your team, she's taking you hostage and controlling the game. And then the rest are just kind of generally even, right? Now, something that he specifically mentions is that he feels like people focus on snipers so much because it feels a lot worse to have bad things happen to you than it does to have good things happen. It feels good to have good things happen to you. So he's saying in particular, it's typical to remember the bad more than good, so getting rolled by a Widowmaker versus when a Widowmaker doesn't do anything. And he's right, and it's unfortunate that he's right and yet doesn't see this. And so if you really get into understanding this whole bad feels worse than good feels good reality, you're going to see some serious issues with the way Widowmaker plays on these different maps. It's not as big of a deal for characters like, I don't know, Symmetra or Junkrat, who are pretty extreme on either side also, meaning they have very good maps and then bad maps. But it's particularly effective because of the way Widowmaker is. because she can just control the whole game. On the maps where she's strong, she just absolutely controls the whole game, right? And they don't understand that in the situation of you playing against a team where they have a crazy Widowmaker and then you losing feels really bad. Now, when you play on one of these maps and then you have the Widowmaker in your team and you win because of that, yeah, it feels good. Or if you are that Widowmaker, it feels good. But it doesn't feel better than it felt worse to just lose because of that. And then if you take it from the opposite thing, on the maps where Widowmaker is bad, if someone plays Widowmaker on the enemy team, yeah, it feels good for you to win because of that, kind of. But if they play it on your enemy or your team and you just lose because of that, it feels a lot worse, right? And it just makes the game even more random. And randomness is not fun at all. I don't know about you guys, but if I knew that when I was going to play Overwatch for the day, if I had a 50-50 chance of winning every game, like literally was just flip a coin, 50-50, I'm just not playing the game. I don't care. Like if I knew every game was going to be stomps and get stomps, then what's the point of playing the game for today? You know, I want to be able to play. I want to be able to have a skill expression and have close games. You know, if every game is just going to be, even if every game is just going to be like me winning every single one of them, and people like it basically being like us just spawn camping them and them disconnecting borderline or standing in spawn, it's just not fun. Like, yeah, I like getting SR, but I don't like it more than I like playing a game. And that's how most people feel, especially in something like quick play, right? If we're not even talking about comp, people who like playing quick play, they don't have fun with this randomness, and there is a lot of it in Overwatch, and they've added way more than has ever been in there before. So this is a serious problem, and it's disappointing that they don't understand this. And so we have this serious issue of the devs just going, oh yeah, this complexity that ruined our game for 3 years, 4 years, maybe 5 years since Brigida. Gosh, it's been so long, right? But it's ruined the game with these 5 years of just continuing the game becoming more and more complex and away from this clean purity that people like of playing Winston, Reinhardt, Tracer, Lucio, Zenyatta, Genji, you know, these other characters that are just pure, and you get advantages from simplicity and understanding the absolute potential of your character. That has been taken out of the game. And that is why Overwatch 1 is not, that's why Overwatch 2 is not as popular as Overwatch 1 and will never be as popular as Overwatch 1. Overwatch, back in its heyday, was there for a reason. And so for the devs to just kind of look at that and go, oh, great, yeah, it's because people like playing those characters more because they've been around for longer. And it's like, see, how are you going to tell me this when it takes me half a second to prove you wrong? If I just say the word Roadhog and Widowmaker, you know? So that's what we're going to see here with the developers. And I basically knew this coming into Overwatch 2. There's no real reason for them to change. They're still making a bunch of money, and the game's popular enough that they don't need to really change things. What you have in a lot of circumstances, you have developers who they do, like, you have to do anything in life, you have to develop a skill set, right? To be a animator for a game, you have to develop a skill set. And to be a level designer or whatever, you have to develop a skill set, right? You have to understand certain things. You have to understand how to work with whatever programs you're using. In some situations, you have to know how to code. You have to know like all these different things, right? Balance and making good balance for a game is a skill set. It is a skill set you do by either heavily studying the game and becoming like basically a high level coach, or playing the game a lot and then studying it and becoming a high tier player. None of the devs are like that. They're not. They're like nowhere near the top of the ladder. And Overwatch is such an incredibly complex game that you don't get to, you can't understand it until you're at that level. And this is no shade against people who aren't there. Like, I'm not looking at these devs and going, oh, what, you're only whatever rank? No, because I know they have a full job. The more content creation I do, the less I get to play the game, and I go, okay, I understand why it can be hard to climb up to certain ranks during, you know, the season, because you're just spending a majority of your time doing other things. The devs don't have the experience. They just don't know, and it's that simple. And because of that, they're going to go the path of least resistance, which is just kind of generally following what people say in responses in community posts and those kind of things, and going based off of numbers. And numbers are numbers, and right, they're always right. No, I mean, right? You have to contextualize them, and yet they don't know how to do that. So that's our problem. And having these game developers balance games where they don't have any true skill sets in them is basically like letting somebody run and letting someone fly your plane who runs an airline company, right? They may be the CEO of Delta or whatever, but they may not actually have any ability to fly the plane, and they probably don't, because that's not their job and that's not their skill set. They don't have all these hours in the jet. They don't have all this time learning how to fly it, consistently keeping their skills up and all that sort of stuff. And I know people will look at me and be like, oh, okay, well, yeah, you talk a lot, but you just, you know, how can you say that developers, how can you say game developers don't know how to develop a game, right? Look at whatever game, all these popular games, and Overwatch before, they built it, they made it, they know it, right? Well, no. That doesn't matter when every game company is like this. And when you have a situation of every game company having kind of mediocre balance as a whole, like misunderstanding simple things of balancing characters in a way that they're equally as good on low ranks as high ranks, so you don't have this issue of having to balance for the top or the bottom, things like that. It just puts the whole game environment in a bad situation. And I don't know if you guys have noticed, but I hear people complaining all the time about the way games are. And a lot of my friends who play these who play at high tiers in competitive games like Apex Legends, League of Legends, Overwatch, Valorant, they're basically always complaining about things, and they're complaining about them for a reason, and it's because of stuff like this. So yeah, guys, have fun. We're gonna get more of that. I mean, Overwatch is in a better state than it was at the very end of Overwatch 1, mainly because they've just added stuff to the game. But yeah, hire me, Blizzard. I'll help you guys. Thanks so much for watching, and if I helped you out with this video, then help me out by hitting a subscribe. Thanks, guys.